I'm thrilled to present to you today with our PWS behavior panel. We have 4 of the world's premier PWS behavior experts who are joining us on stage today to share their insights into PWS behavior. Before we get started, however, we do have to take a moment to thank some of our amazing supporters, because without their help, this would never be possible. As you've heard earlier today, we have invested more than $10 million into research, nearly $12 million by the end of this year. And this is only made possible by all of you who have donated, who have fundraised, who have set up fundraising pages. And to give a little bit of credit to a few special people here, we have 7 couples who have all raised more than $75,000 in the last 12 months. Now I'm hoping that they're all in this room. They may not be, but I know I see at least one. So if you can stand up so that we can acknowledge you, I would really appreciate that. How about, let's see, do we have Kim and Justin Nelson? Are they in here? Do we have Kim and Justin? No? They do the I Got a Guy Sausage Festival. They did it just this past August. More than 300 people attended, and they raised nearly $200,000 in one night. They host this in conjunction with Judy and Guy Niederkorn. These are their grandparents. They joined us last year, and this year was their second year just for Shafiang related research, so Prader-Willi research. Is Mary and Ian Alberg in the room? I think they stepped out when they said I was going to make them stand. There they are. Stand up, you guys. They are hosting this year's DC Gala. And in case you haven't heard, there's a featured guest. President Bill Clinton will be in attendance. So thank you guys, for hosting this amazing event. Julie Fogarty and Rachel Fisher, are they in here? Oh, they're socializing. They are phenomenal. They do a wonderful Thanksgiving Day 5K. It's called Harvesting Hope, and they've been raising well over $50,000 to $75,000 every year for the last several years. So they're not in here to acknowledge, but if you see them outside, let them know how much we do thank them. So without further ado, let's see. Here we go. PWS's behavior is, challenging. It's certainly one of my family's greatest challenges, and moderating today's session will be Lauren Roth. Lauren is a psychologist by training. She's also the mother to Emma, who is 19 years old. Lauren's contributions to FPWR have been immeasurable. Besides being a board member during FPWR's beginning years, she also planned and executed the 2015 Mental Health Strategic Workshop, which brought together behavior researchers from around the world. Several of the research collaborations we are funding are a result of that workshop, and the top 10 recommendations from the workshop were recently published, and the work that's been done towards those aims. So if you haven't seen that blog, go check it out. It really lays out some really amazing work and collaborations that have come out of that workshop. So to get us started with today's panel, I'm going to present you with Lauren Roth. Oh, you want to use that?
I should use this one?
You can use that one.
Okay, maybe you might be able to see me if I stand to the side, Susan tells me. So thank you all for coming. And we've gathered quite an amazing group of experts in Prader-Willi behavioral challenges. So just to give a little agenda, a little roadmap, being the parent of a child with Prader-Willi means you like structure. I enjoy a structure and a roadmap. So we're going to have everybody introduce themselves just briefly, and then we've been gathering questions from the community for the last few weeks. So we're going to start out with sort of a few planned questions and have various members weigh in, and then we'll have some time for questions from the audience at the end. Okay. So, Kate, do you want to start? And you just grab a mic. Does it work?
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Kate Woodcock, and I work at the University of Birmingham in the UK. Most of my research with people with Prader-Willi syndrome focuses on the rigidity and the difficulties with change that people can experience, and specifically a lot of the temper outbursts that can be linked to that rigidity. So two of the really exciting things that we're working on at the moment is we've just finished developing a video game for training some of the cognitive or brain processes that we think are linked to that rigidity. So later on, I'm going to talk more about that in my talk. We don't have the results yet, but I'm excited about them anyway. And another really, really exciting project that we're working on is looking at an early intervention approach, also trying to tackle those rigidity problems, so trying to help children to develop more flexible thinking from an early age. And the other thing was, how did I get involved in Prader-Willi syndrome? So I did my PhD on Prader-Willi syndrome maybe about 12 or 15 years ago. And I think just what excited me about it was just that there's such a strong community, and it's really it's easy for us as researchers to then find out what you guys need. And I found that having that drive behind my research was just a really, really exciting thing, because it meant that I could make sure that the research that I was doing was tailored for what people need.
I have a much less cool accent than you, so I don't want to bore everyone to death. My name is Patrice Carroll, and I'm the director of PWS services at Latham Centers in Massachusetts. Latham Centers is both a residential school for kids with PWS, ages 8 to 22. We also have an adult program. Combined, we have about 100 individuals with PWS. We've been doing it for about 40 years, so we've been around for a while. How I got into working with people with PWS was totally by accident. It was about 18 years ago. I was working with individuals with traumatic brain injury, and they asked me to oversee some of the houses with people with PWS for a couple of weeks. And I fell in love, and I've been with it ever since, so that's how I got involved.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Roof, and I'm at Vanderbilt University, recently switching from the medical center over to the Department of Psychology. I feel like I'm on the set of Oprah, I'll be very honest with you. I'm like, hey, Lauren, oh, awesome. Yeah. And I have worked with people with Prader-Willi for the last 23 years and have done several longitudinal studies working with a lot of different investigators, most recently the last 15 with Elizabeth Dykins, who the two of us have been working specifically on behavioral and psychiatric features. Two of the cool things we're working on is we just finished data collection for a FPWR grant called BOSS, which is Building Our Social Skills. And we actually did an online kind of like group, social group. We had 10 groups of between 5 and 7 kids with Prader-Willi who met every week for 10 weeks. And I'm going to be presenting some data tomorrow on that, because we saw some really significant changes in people's ability to communicate effectively, to kind of be appropriate and not always be all about them, which is hard sometimes when you have Prader-Willi syndrome. And the other thing we're doing that's really cool is we're working with FPWR to do these focus groups with teens and adults with Prader-Willi syndrome. So I've done about 15 people and hope to get the rest of them done in the next week. We're asking them about what it's like to have PWS. If there are drugs that worked, what would they do, and what difference would it make on their life? And the answers they have given me have just been mind-blowing. I literally sometimes leave after and I've been doing this forever, so it's hard to bring me to tears, but literally so touching, so insightful, and so amazing. So we're going to transcribe all that stuff, and when they go to the FDA in a month, they'll have all that with them so they can actually show the FDA that people with PWS can talk about what it's like to have PWS, and they can do it incredibly eloquently.
Hi, I'm Anastasia I'm a developmental psychologist at Case Western Reserve University. I have most of my work in Prader-Willi syndrome, or I'd say most of my research has been in Prader-Willi syndrome, and most of my work has characterized behavior problems with the syndrome. Most recently, my group is working on social cognitive skills in young children and identifying where there might be challenges and learning ways in which we can improve these skills through parent training and through direct intervention with young children. So tomorrow I will be talking with Elizabeth. We'll be talking about our projects, and so I'll tell you a little bit more about our what we call the pretend program, which is kind of silly, but we do use play-based enrichment through parent training and direct intervention to work with young children to improve these skills. I will say that I first got introduced to Prader-Willi syndrome 24 years ago as a college student I was a camp counselor and was introduced to an individual where I was in charge of her food for a week, and her food schedule was different than the rest of the campers that were in that camp and in my cabin. And so I was very quickly introduced to what a Prader-Willi syndrome tantrum is. And then that led me to my work in tantrums early on, and repetitive and ritualistic behavior, and that's where it all started. So,
Thank you. Isn't it great that people study this stuff? And one of the great things about our research and clinical community is whenever we ask them to do things, they always say yes. It's so great. And a great response, even offer to help. So I feel really honored and lucky to have them all here. So I'm going to start out this session with throwing out a question that's a really common one that comes up for many families, which is, what are your thoughts on the hyperphagia behavior link? There's a lot of often conversation about, well, if we treat hyperphagia, what will happen to the behavior problems? Will they go away? Are all the behavior problems related to hunger, or are there other issues? And so I will just let anybody who would like to grab that question.
You want me to start? Okay, yeah, this is a very, very common question. I think that my answer would be, if we were able to take that off the table, we would see a decrease in anxiety about that, right? About that particular thing. It would take a lot of anxiety away. It wouldn't take all of the anxiety away. From a programmatic standpoint, it would open up huge opportunities for vocational work and for some long-term living. I think that it would be amazing for the community. I think it would be amazing for the individuals. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would take a certain amount of anxiety away. You want to add to that?
If anybody has anything new to add or anything else.
I think that actually is a really good question. I would really say we don't know. I mean, we thought everyone thinks that all the anxiety and all the behavior issues are related to food, but having done some clinical trials where we really did tamp down the hyperphagia, for some of our folks, they still had issues with schedules and things going as planned and things like that. So I would say there's definitely still some anxiety that's kind of under there, and it maybe isn't related to food. So I think it's really important for us to realize that even if we fix hyperphagia or we manage it, it's still going to be really hard for some of our folks to kind of manage some of the behavioral expectations that they do have.
I'll just add, for individuals with developmental disabilities who don't have Prader-Willi syndrome, they also face some significant behavior challenges. So not being at the same developmental level as your peers could put you at risk for behavior challenges. Communication issues lead to frustration. So I completely agree that it would alleviate a lot of the anxiety, but there may still be some behavior challenges associated with other features of Prader-Willi syndrome.
And I think it's also important to remember that for any of us, food, like just being hungry is, really nasty. And just outside of Prader-Willi syndrome, we know that being hungry feeling is really potent for just difficult behaviours in general. And so I think it's important for us to think about in that respect as well, because it just helps us, I think, to better understand what the person might be feeling. And I think that sort of leads into some of the other questions that Lauren was going to ask us about.
Yes. Great discussion. So the answer is sort of. Right. Kind of. The other question that comes up a lot is this idea about consequences for behavior. And there's sort of common lore that negative consequences don't work for Prader-Willi. And I wonder if some of you could address that. And then if you agree they don't work, what is helpful?
Every time you say it, I'm like, me?
Elizabeth,
okay.
You start.
Okay. Very good. So I'm a big believer that generally I don't like to use punishment for people with PWS. I feel like they often have a hard time relating what they did to the punishment, and I kind of also feel like the punishment should fit the crime. So the idea of natural consequences, if you do this, then you won't get to do the thing you wanted to because you're going to run out of time, or we weren't able to do it. I think those are sometimes better consequences, and I think for a lot of it is using positive reinforcement instead of always using negative things. Threats, ultimatums, things like that generally do not work with anybody with a developmental disability, and especially not for Prader-Willi. And a lot of times, even if you get them to do it, they will retaliate later, or they will do something else because they're mad about it. So I think it's really important to come up with better, positive ways, visual schedules, anything you can think of to kind of move them along, because for most of them, they just get stuck. So what you consider non-compliance may be on your perspective, but for them, it's that you can't hurry them up, you can't make them do something. So it's better to lead them there than it is to try to shove them into that spot.
I just want to say one thing. I also think that whereas like my 16-year-old who started driving, who did something she wasn't supposed to do and then lost the car for 3 days, she will remember that and not do that other thing again. I don't think that our kids have that kind of brain that can think about, gee, if I do that, this might happen. So sometimes I think a consequence for a behavior isn't as effective. Incentives for good behavior seem to work better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I think that would be the same probably for most of us, that we prefer, being positively rewarded for things. But in the work that we've done in developing our video game, we definitely have a balance towards being positively rewarded for things. But we do also have, it's not a punishment, but it's like it's alerting the person about, you need to do better, basically. And actually, we found that sort of frustration that can create actually has really encouraged some of our players to get involved with the game and keep playing and actually overcome some of the challenges that they thought, so where they thought they just wouldn't be able to do it at all, they've actually got to the point where they've realised, actually, I can do it, I've really done a lot more than what I thought I could. So I think definitely balance towards positive reward, but just like, I think people can manage some subtle reminders of, okay, I'm not doing so well and I need to do better.
Okay, next question. So what are a couple of things that the panel would recommend that parents tell schools, caregivers, extended family? What are sort of 2 to 3 really important messages that we always share?
So I'll start with this one with just really a general remark, and then we can add some details to it. Most specifically for schools, I think that with any child with PWS, you can make a list of the challenges. And then if you make a list of what's good, that list of what's good will be so much longer than the list of challenges. And what we tend to do sometimes, especially in a school setting, is you'll sit in a meeting for an hour, and the beginning, the middle, and the end are going to be all the things that they want to fix about your child, that you need to change about your child. And they spend no time talking about the fact that your child is sweet and engaging and funny and really, really smart and creative. And they talk about he perseverates and she's aggressive and he won't do non-preferred tasks. So if you're in that meeting, don't allow that. Make sure that if they're saying something that needs to be fixed, they're saying 2 things that are amazing, because you know more than anybody that these are kids that you want to spend time with. These are kids that have that list of good things that is so, so long. And if we spend more time talking about the good things, if they spent half the time talking about what was good, like they do talking about what needs to be fixed, and building that up and building that into their program and talking about that and enhancing that, the behaviors are not going to go away, but you'll definitely see a big decrease in them. You want to add to what to say to?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really good point to make about really focusing on the positive. And I think some of the other things is to make sure that schools and other people who work with your child don't set them up to fail. We have a lot of schools and other places where they'll allow food to be in the classroom. They'll use, all sorts of other things. And I'm like, what are you thinking? That just seems like a really bad idea. The kid with PWS gets stuck. They can't think about anything else. They can't be educated. So I think, again, knowing what they're good at, knowing what the limitations are, and putting some structure in place where they're not always set up to fail. They want to succeed. Other people want them to succeed, but you've got to set up the paradigm by giving them the information so they know what to do.
I would add to that I think food security, what your family's goals for food security are, need to be very clear with all the people in your child's life, and that looks different for every family. So I think it's important to reduce that anxiety that comes up and set them up for a situation that will be best for them in whatever caregiving situation they're in. And then also to think about where they are developmentally. So if they're an adolescent in a school system, the best food security at lunchtime may not be the most appropriate for a teenage girl, right? So it may be that those conversations need to include, how does this fit in with her social life and her peer group if she's being isolated to eat lunch? So I think those things are important to consider as you talk to schools and caregivers.
Those are great ideas. And I know when it comes to food security, sometimes schools and daycare centers, especially if your kid's doing well, will sort of, I don't know if they don't take you seriously, or they might wait until there's a problem. And I'm a big fan of prevention. Just get it set up from the beginning. And if you have to, scare them a little bit. I often talk about life-threatening hunger, because it's a phrase I read somewhere. And so I think really letting them know this is serious, even though your child may be of a good weight and may be very verbal. But so really kind of letting them know that this is a serious business. Yeah. Okay. There were several questions that came up on the app about flexible thinking, how to encourage flexible thinking, and I know people must have known you were going to be here. So maybe, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about like some sort of quick at-home strategies for that. Your talk is at 4 o'clock today, so.
Yeah, so I am going to cover it a lot in my talk at 4 o'clock, so I don't want to anticipate that too much, because then you'll have nothing to hear later. But I guess one of the things that we've done is try to think about what are the brain processes that might be important for flexible thinking, and then how we might be able to train those brain processes. And I guess our current thinking, which also feeds into the early intervention idea that we have, is about how we might give young children the opportunity to practice flexibility at the right time, and how we might build that into the structures that children need, but while still giving them this opportunity to practice the flexibility. But I will talk about that more later.
Anastasia, you want to add to that?
I will also add that this is something, at least for young children, you can do in play as well. So setting up a play scenario where you're sitting together and playing through situations that maybe you change the story up so that it's not the same every time, or you introduce some alternatives that you may get resistance on, but that you can build into to thinking about resistance and flexibility with the characters and not with the actual child, right? The child's playing through the story with you, and you can use the characters to work out some of those flexibility issues for young children.
And I wanted to add that taking baby steps, you don't have to jump off a cliff to do something really crazy to make your kid be flexible. I think taking baby steps so they kind of know, and even making it fun and challenging. I mean, when parents will tell me they drive the same way from their house to the school every day, and I'm like, you make it up, it's crazy Friday, you never know which way I'm going to go, and you take a different way, and the kid will be in the back seat going, oh my God, right. And you get there and you go, look, we still made it here, even though we took a different way. Right. You start kind of shaking things up by baby steps and making it fun, and again, it's a great way to get them to realize that not every change is a bad thing, but sometimes you have to really play it up and act up when it comes to those things.
Yeah, and just briefly, the only thing I'll add is that social stories are the greatest things ever. You can write them really, really quickly about any scenario.
Good.
It's We've used those quite a bit. They're helpful. We've talked about this issue so much in my house that my daughter calls me on being rigid at times. Mommy, you could be a little more flexible about this. And she's right. One more planned question. This is kind of a big one, which is that someone on the app asked was, can people with Prader-Willi, in quotes, grow up and take responsibility for things, kind of make good choices when it comes to food and other things in their life?
All right, I'll start with this one. I think that individuals with PWS can make huge strides with the right environment, the right structure, the right meds, a number of things. I think, and I'm curious, Elizabeth, what you think about this, I think it's fairly safe to say that wherever your child is in their teen years, whatever supports they need at that point, it's probably what they're going to need going forward, unless something comes along that changes that. I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. Do you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. And I think this idea that the growing up part is really interesting to me because we follow people all the way up through 50s and 60s and they still have food issues. So I think it's unfair to put them in positions to fail. So I think you set up structures and ways to kind of help supervise and monitor that keep them safe. But again, it's okay to give them some level of freedom as long as it doesn't risk their health or anything else. So I think you have to, but it's not fair to put that on them and give them responsibility because it would be like any of us taking responsibility. It's not a cognitive process. If only people who were low functioning were overweight, well, you know, what kind of world we live in? That's not really what it is. It's not a cognitive ability. They're hungry, and if the right opportunity and the lack of supervision gives them the ability to get food, that's not fair to them. So I think you have to just know that it's not fair to say that they should take responsibility. That's setting them up to fail.
Elizabeth, I was just going to say, just related to that, and maybe you can comment on this as well, Anastasia. So when a person with Prader-Willi does have a food violation, any thoughts about how to respond to that?
The only thing I was going to say is it's not a cognitive issue. It's also not a maturity issue. So we think of our children as, you know, graduating from high school and then starting their careers or their life path. And hyperphagia is not a maturity issue. So we wouldn't think that that would change after that time period.
Yeah, and to respond to that question as well. If there is a food violation, right, if somebody gets to food, that's an issue in the system. So we don't do anything as far as a consequence for that. Unless it was a large amount of food and they need to be seen by a medical professional. But if there is food acquired somehow, that's an issue in the system that we need to fix.
And I think the other thing you could do is if it's if you know what the food is and you know the calories, I just look at them and say, hey, so because of this, and I don't blame them, I just say because of this issue, I'm gonna take that extra calories away so you don't have to worry about that later. And they're funny, they're like, what do you mean I don't have to worry about it? But it's really good because you take that responsibility off them and don't really it's not a moral issue. I always hate when people say they stole something. Well, when you steal food, it's not the same thing as taking something from a store. So I think it's really important to kind of know that the consequence should be subtracting calories or doing something else to make it equalize out, but I would not ever take food from somebody who's already acquired it. That's a really good way to get yourself hurt.
No, that's exactly right. There have been times where somebody has taken food and hasn't eaten it yet, and we've said, you can either give it back or that amount of calories will come out of dinner. And they almost always give it back because they want their regular dinner.
But you're also giving them some control
over it. You're giving them
over
a choice, yeah.
The other thing, someone mentioned it to me, I think it was Evan, that sometimes when kids with Prader-Willi are kind of having more behavioral issues and you don't know why, especially when they're a little bit older, sometimes it's because there's been a food violation, and I don't know if they feel guilty or, but one thing I've instituted with my daughter when I've suspected that is it's like a confessional, like, okay, you have 15 minutes. Just tell me it all. I will have no response. I will just say thank you for telling me. Mm-hmm. And with that strategy, that's worked well for getting intel.
That's awesome. I love that.
Great. So why don't we have some questions from the audience? I know. Okay. I'm not. Yes. Can you help?
Thanks. Quick question on something that we do with our daughter where it came to mind when we were asking the question about what to tell schools and also how to deal with rigid thinking. One thing that we found is a pause, like an extra wait time for requests or dealing with any kind of situation is super important. I'm wondering how much of that you guys have seen kind of across the population where, you know, asking our child with PWS to do something that she might not want to do, she'll initially just say no or won't do it or will rebel. But if you give her maybe 2 minutes, she comes around and she just does it. So it's a beat, and we found that really helps with school, it really helps at home. How much of that have you seen?
I love that. I've worked with a number of individuals who, both kids and adults, who if you ask them something, they'll just immediately say no, just because it's a control issue. So I love the idea of a pause. What we've also done is, for people who really, really have challenges with this, is ask them to do something. Don't look at them. Ask them to do something and they immediately walk away. And then they have that moment to decide whether to do it or not without it being a power struggle. And that pause is really, really important because many individuals with PWS also have executive functioning disorder, and they don't have that pause built in them at all. So if you're able to teach that pause before answering by example, that's an amazing thing to do because they don't have it. So they have to learn that. So that's great.
And I think, too, like a cooperative way of, I always say, I don't ask them to put on their shoes. I don't say, do you want to get dressed? I say, oh, it's time to get dressed. So it's not a request because that's almost always met with a no. So this idea, I think the idea of a pause is great. And I think a lot of kids, like you said, struggle with that. They can't wait. They have to automatically say no. But I think it is a good way to kind of help them delay gratification, but also delay a confrontation. Because for a lot of people, requests feel confrontational, and so you have to kind of check your tone, the way you look at them, because again, if you're looking stern and all whatever, they look at that and go, I don't know what you're doing here, but I feel like this is a really negative thing. Yeah. So try to sell it to them a little bit with your expression and how you ask. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I have an 11-year-old, I'm over here. I have an 11-year-old son, I'm from Canada. And he's started now to actually pick up gum and garbage as you're walking with him. So I know it becomes a parent's responsibility to try and reduce all those environmental problems, but it becomes totally unrealistic because he'll be holding your hand and he'll grab something and put it in his pocket. We don't know how. We've done all the teaching cognitive. I know that doesn't make any difference. He doesn't care that he could get very sick. He just tells us it tastes good. So if you have any strategies, because it's getting worse, he's going to go into junior high next year. There's food access everywhere in the hallways and the garbage. So do you have any strategies when he may know it's unsafe, but that doesn't make any difference to him because he's hungry?
Is someone with him all the time that sees when it happens?
Yes, he's never, ever left alone, believe me.
So every time it happens, you see it, right?
No, we'll be holding his hand and he'll grab with the other hand. And he'll just snatch it. And we don't even see him do that, but he's never alone. That's one of our problems as well.
I'm just wondering if they could do something where at the end of every day where he doesn't do it, he gets something.
Yeah, I would say something positive. And
something,
again, they don't have a level of disgust. So this idea of something being gross, we did a study where we actually showed them all these odd things like chocolate milk stirred with a comb, and they're like, oh, I drink that.
Sure,
They don't see the same things that we see.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important not to think about it as germs because they don't care. It is something good. But I do think if he doesn't do it, getting some kind of reward, even to chew sugar-free gum, whatever you think, a sticker, doesn't matter. It starts to help him. It's an impulse control issue. It's I see it, I want it, I take it. So if you can help him limit that response, and if he doesn't do it, give him a reward, that's a great idea.
Even if it is gum, and I know this is, oh God, she's going to say give him food. But in some cases, if you don't do this all day, because this is potentially dangerous behavior, right? Yeah, if you could reward him at the end of the day, even to say you get 3 sticks of gum, and give him the gum. I'd rather have him have the gum from the wrapper than on the street, right? So if that would work, if he could refrain from doing that, knowing that there's something he really wants at the end of the day, absolutely do it. Yeah.
But I don't know also how, because there's an issue if you're giving him a reward at the end of the day, then he has to wait for that. So it might be that it would help to do something immediately. If you could give him something immediately that would then signal, okay, later you can get whatever it is that you think. But if you could give him something immediately when he, instead of actually taking the garbage at that point, then that might help get over that initial barrier.
Would that work with the token system then? Would you give him a token instead of another piece of gum? I mean, because if my son knew that every time he was going to pick up a piece of gum off the ground, he's going to pick up another piece of gum off the ground to get a piece of gum.
Right,
So
but
would you add the token system into that then?
you could. I kind of hate the token system. It's just kind of, I think it's beneath what they're able to do. I think that he could understand that we're walking from the car into the mall or whatever. You walk in here safely, you're getting the gum, right? So there could be 6 pieces of gum on the ground that he didn't pick up. It doesn't matter. You walk in there, you're getting the gum. Because it's only when you're outside walking around, right?
So you're talking about doing it preventative first then? So
Yeah.
every time you go out in the public, you say, okay, if you can make it through here without grabbing something out of the trash.
Yeah.
Or something out on the ground.
Yeah.
When you get done, you're going to have your piece of gum.
That's right.
And you're setting up the expectation, which I think is really important. We often get into a situation where you're out in public, something awful happens, and you go, wow, who knew they were going to do this? Well,
Right.
you should always anticipate that if you're going to be at a place and something's going to happen, you need to kind of know the lay of the land, what the expectations are, and if things are going to get out of hand, they need to know, we will leave the premises, and I tell people, and you have to do it. So you have to make it so they understand that. So I think it's good to actually have that expectation set up.
I agree, and I think that was another question that came up
It was, yeah.
about not having a,
Going out in public. and
going out in
having-
public and not
something bad
wanting to
happen.
avoid a scene, so giving in. Don't ever do that. So if something happens and you had an expectation and you go into public and your child's about to cause a scene and you don't want one and you say, all right, forget it, we'll do what you want to do, well, there you go. You've just set up.
It's the slot
Yes.
machine.
Yes.
You pull
Yes.
the handle
Yep.
50 times, and one
Yep.
time you get a payout, and then you're sitting there for 8 hours,
Yes.
in a casino doing it. So it is that thing, and I
Yes.
think people often think that I just need to get my kid out of this situation, so I'll give in.
Don't.
I actually had a girl many years ago who laid in the middle of the street at Vanderbilt, and cars were stopping. Everyone thought she'd been hit, and I walk up to her. I actually thought she fell, and she looks up at me and she goes, "Give me a cookie." I go, "I don't have a cookie." She goes, "I need a cookie. Give me a cookie." And she just kept saying it. I told her mom. I said, the mom goes, "Give her a cookie." I go, "Again, I don't have a cookie on me." The mom apparently had been doing it on a regular basis. I said, "We're going to get up. We're going to walk across the street. And we're just going to go to the corner." And I said, "She'll follow us." And she finally does. "I hate you." I go, "Yeah, I know." And the mom said, "How did you know she was going to get up?" I said, "Well, I wasn't entirely sure, but I'm really glad she did." And for the rest of the day, we had a lot better issue with compliance because she knew I was not going to give in. So giving in is such a disaster because you set your kid up to know that sometimes they are going to get a reinforcer.
Yeah.
You really cannot give in no matter how
true.
strong the behavior goes.
Yeah.
Because they're going to go from throwing a tantrum.
They'll escalate.
They'll escalate
That's
it
right.
until that you give in, and then they're going to start there the next time.
Yep.
That's right.
So you
Totally
really
true.
gotta
That's
make
right.
sure that you're consistent.
Yeah.
So they,
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, I think my daughter is smarter than I am, to tell you the truth. But there's one thing that she comes home and she says, "Dad, why am I so wrong? I'm different, and nobody likes me." And of course, I tell her, "Well, think about it. You have friends who can't see or hear, or is there a web or something so the kids could say, hey, I am okay."
Yeah, I mean, so the social skills group, what was so nice is, we have this, it looked like Brady Bunch tiles kind of on a screen, and it was really cool because every person in the group would go, "Everyone has Prader-Willi?" "Yeah, everyone has Prader-Willi." "Are you sure? Because some of these people don't look like they have Prader-Willi." They do. All good. And it was really cool for them to see people who were doing better than them, maybe worse than them, the same as them. They really developed some strong friendships. So I think pointing out that everyone has deficits. I mean, I can't find my way out of a paper bag. I mean, seriously, I've been lost in this hotel for 2 whole days. I think it's really important to kind of point out things that everyone is not good at something. So this idea that everybody struggles with something. So they need to know that they have a lot of strengths. And like Patrice said, pointing out their strengths. Yeah. You're caring, you love animals, you're good at puzzles, you do this, you do that, is really important for them to kind of focus on the positive and not get stuck on the negative. Yeah.
My daughter's 5. We've been struggling with potty training. She just gets in that rigid point where I don't want to go on the potty. I like my diaper better. Yeah. And we've been trying with the positive reinforcement. We've done stickers. We've gone to some food items sometimes. But even with that, she still is very rigid. Do you have any suggestions for potty training?
I don't know if we do, but I'm certain that other people sitting in this room do. Can anyone help this lady out?
Cindy.
Yeah. So I would say if you can, I would say just go ahead and stand up and raise your hand so that you guys can connect. So I see one person over there. And then the other thing, Lauren, I think there's the breakfast meeting tomorrow. So your age group breakfast would also be, I think, a great resource for you to talk with other parents.
Yeah,
so
and just to know, you are not alone in this. No. You are even at 5. You're not different. Yeah, no, you'll have friends here.
Do you want me to answer now?
You guys talk after. Is that okay? Yeah. Do you guys see each other? Okay. Yeah, he was next, and then you're after.
Hi, my son is 6, and we have an issue at the moment with kind of nail peeling, where ever since he started school about 14 months ago, he's constantly picking at his nails, toenails and fingernails. And it's obviously in anxious situations, but it's also in boredom situations if he's just watching TV. And if you look at him, he'll stop instantly and put his hands away because he knows not to, but the impulse is too strong. And it's gone so far that he's pulled off his toenails at stages. And our endocrinologist has told us just to ignore behaviour, but that was over a year ago, and it hasn't improved. So we're just wondering if there's any strategies we can use on that.
I'll start? Yeah, okay, I'll start. And then sometimes you almost always will see some little picking, right? Pretty much across the board. The cuticles, anytime there's a bug bite. When you're getting to the point where it is pulling fingernails or toenails off or having some real deep picking to the point where it's becoming dangerous, you may be looking at some sort of barrier. So if he's picking at his toenails, he might be wearing tights, right, so he can't get to them. He might be wearing gloves so he can't get to them. And then it kind of changes that pattern a little bit because he's not going to immediately go to his toenail to pull it off if there's a barrier there. So that may help. I wanted to give
and perhaps also trying to substitute the sensation for something else. So some people that we've spoken to have used things like a sticker book where you can like peel off the stickers and put them back down again. So because particularly if it's a boredom thing, if you could have that when you're sitting in front of the telly to just sort of so you make it harder to pick the nails but easier to do something else that would substitute it.
And especially when they're doing an activity like watching TV or where they can kind of zone out, that's usually the highest risk time of doing those things. So making sure they have the barrier. Some people use liquid Band-Aid and a Band-Aid and socks. I mean, because you want to interrupt that impulse, which ignoring will not do anything. Great question.
Yeah, I have. I'm Joanne Griggs from Australia. Hi, everyone. Long way. I just wanted to say about the flexibility, the idea of having flexibility. One thing that we did, which was really good and has continued throughout our time, was we created very early on in first, second year, third year, this idea that change is something specific that we are going to do now. And so what we did was we did half a day of surprise. And so we had a whole half a day of surprise where we did create larger and bigger and more interesting things that were always outside the box, so that the idea, so that the environment became bigger and bigger and bigger, and nothing became something that she hadn't done. And so now we can actually, if ever we want something to change, we're just saying it's change time now. And it's worked. It's been very, very, very helpful.
How old was he when you started?
We did this with Mia. She was probably about 2. We started straight away. But then she's 14 now, so we still use that. And with the picking, you know how you're saying just use positive reinforcement? We use negative as positive. So what we do is we say, this is your iPad, you can have your iPad. She likes the idea that it will be taken away if she does something like pick. So she keeps the iPad. So we reverse it, yeah. Yep. So I didn't have a question, I just wanted, just in case that was helpful.
Hi, so my question has to do with teenagers transitioning into adulthood. So my daughter's 17, she's a senior, she's going to be graduating and has, you know, the aspiration to go to college, to become a veterinarian technician. She wants to start working at a pet store. So of course, my concern is that she does need constant supervision, which she does have now in high school with a one-on-one aide, but going into the workforce, for instance, I mean, how, and maybe you could tell me if you know of examples or how things have been done with other families, but how could they transition into a working environment and be able to still be safe? Because, you know, she obviously would steal out of the fridge or take money out of coworkers' purses or, you know, those types of things. And a kind of sidebar to that question, with theft in those kinds of situations, as an adult, once they turn 18, I mean, how is something like that managed? I mean, do they go to jail?
First of all, congratulations. That's a pretty exciting time, but I will say it's scary. I think part of it is we do have, I actually have, I think 9 or 10 people who are working in some kind of job, but they do have some level of supervision. I will say that, you know, having access to coworkers' lunches and things like that should not be allowed. If you do job coaching where somebody is there coaching them how to do the job, you know, if they if you can fade some of that out or they need some level of that, then you do what you need to keep them safe. The other thing you can do is actually have them kind of weigh in or do kind of checks or something else to kind of keep them accountable. So for one young lady who was working in a hospital, she was stealing stuff kind of left and right, and what they started doing is weighing her every day, and sure enough, her weight was going up. And once we found out that was happening, we had to actually scale back her job and things like that. So I would say she's going to need some level of supervision. As far as the theft, everyone should know that this person has a disability. They have Prader-Willi. This is likely to happen. So the law enforcement, the people at the work, everyone should know you do not want to have some law enforcement person trying to do the old, you know, scared straight, I'm going to teach you a lesson, and try to like scare them. That does not work. It's a really dangerous situation. So everyone needs to know, and they need to expect that it's going to happen, that she's going to maybe take stuff on occasion, but supervise.
Hi, I'm just going to sit, if that's okay, since you can see me. So this is more of an observation, and I guess kind of I'm thinking that this is a good strategy, so I want to bounce it off of you. But 2 things. The first is our son just turned 7 today. But last year, when he was 5, we started some therapy, like behavior therapy at school with a school psychologist who's actually been tremendously helpful. But he was having some issues with impulse control, as I'm sure many here can relate to. And one of the things that she did was, you know, he has apraxia of speech. So she wanted to give him some tools, verbal tools, that he could actually say that would help him understand the choices that he was making. And the two words that she started giving him were unexpected and expected in relation to his behavior. So if it was something that was not good, that was, maybe where he was not in control, or maybe he was not positively affecting the people around him, and there was like a 3-step process. I actually have it here on my phone just so I could explain it. But it was basically like, if you're not following the plan, if you're acting opposite of what is expected of you, then you are acting unexpectedly. And so it got to the point where, with lots of repetition, and we followed suit at home, that when he would do something impulsive, I would get down to his level as a 5-year-old, and I would say, buddy, was that expected or unexpected behavior? And I would use it, in a positive way as well when he was doing something really good. And he was every time able to tell me that it was unexpected or expected, exactly the right way. And so we've continued using that language, and now he's 7, and I still feel like it's been a really great tool. And what we've noticed is that, it's like empowered him. He's not hitting. He's using his words like, I'm so mad, he'll say that. And we'll talk about how that could lead to an unexpected behavior. Is that on? Yeah. And then last but not least, and I'm not sure if this is a good tool, but 2 years ago, we just had a lot of new behaviors that were emerging in the last few years. And my son is obsessed with scary stuff. I don't know if anybody else here, but he really is interested in magic, and particularly witches. And I kind of created this alter ego. Her name is He. And she basically uses reverse psychology on Jude, and not my voice. It's like a totally different person. And it works every time. If I need him, if he is being very, very rigid, or he's opposing bath time, or he's opposing going to school, he steps in, and she's like, yeah, I'm not going to do the voice because it's really embarrassing. Yeah, right. No pressure. Maybe after a few cocktails. But she comes in and she basically says things like, yeah, don't go to school, Jude, because if you go to school, you're going to get too smart and you're going to learn how to read my spell book. Or she basically, and he gets so excited about that because she never wants him to do anything good. And same with his shot. If he's opposing the shot, she thinks that's hilarious because he's never going to grow up and he'll never be able to be empowered, in kid words. And so, but that's working for us. And I don't know for how long it's going to work, but if we're in a very stressful situation, he'll look at me and he'll say, he. And I have to embody her voice right away. And if I answer in my voice, he's like, no, he. And then when he wants mom, he'll say mom, and I have to switch back. But it's really effective. And so I think it does two things for him. It gets him in a pretend play situation where he feels like maybe there's some element of game or control around what we're doing. And I don't know, I think it just, on an airplane, it literally works every single time we're in a stressful situation. So I just wanted to share that. I don't know if this is the right approach. I don't know if we should be doing this because it does kind of put him in this fantasy world. But we went to the Halloween store and he saw a really ugly witch and he goes, he, is that you? So he loves it and he knows that it's not real. But I just wanted to ask if that's something that you would suggest is a good thing or not.
So here, this is an example of kind of the key to every behavior working with PWS. You do what works until it doesn't work anymore, and then you do something else. So, yay. Good job, He.
Can I also add that I think your comments highlight two really important things. One, that you're communicating with the school and you're using consistent methods that the school is using. And I think that's really helpful for children, right? So that you're in contact and that you're working it together. I think the other thing that you've highlighted by sharing your story is that all of you can help each other so much because you have the on-the-ground daily experience every day. So we see your children sometimes, some more than others, but you all have rich experiences that you should be sharing with each other. And I agree, it works for now, and that's wonderful until you need to change it again.
I applaud the creativity here. We do need to stop. I know we could go on forever, but we do have other things to do. So I encourage people to get together with other parents, network, go to the age breakfast, and share ideas. There was a couple of folks who are interested in the potty training idea, so maybe you all could have a drink tonight and talk about potty training or get together after this session. But I want to thank our amazing panel.